She edited Femina for 12 long years, a job surrounded by glamour and interesting lives. It was probably a natural transition to capture some of these lives in her books. While Satya's early works were books of short stories and a book on modern marriages, her biggest and best sellers have been the ones on the fascinating lives of Jagjit Singh, Guru Dutt, S.D. Burman, and the most recent, that of the living legend Pandit Hariprasad Chaurasia. Breath of Gold, an authorized biography of Panditji, was published by Penguin Random House a few months ago and has been capturing cover stories and making headlines across the country. She writes a regular column for Dainik Jagran and continues to contribute to various publications. So join me today to get a peek into the life of an editor and a writer whose own life would form an interesting book. Welcome, Sathya, to Between the Lines.
Hi, Lipika. Thank you.
So, all these fascinating lives that you have written about, artists look for their muse to paint. How do you pick the profiles that you would like to write on?
Well, sometimes the profiles choose me, so to say. I think Guru Dutt happened because I read a story which talked about his last day, and at the end of that story in the Express, the author said, the journalist said that the person, Abrar, Alvi, whom I've interviewed, has many more stories if someone has the time. And I had the time. So that's how that book got written. And Penguin was very, I was an unknown author. I was a journalist, but I was not an author, except for my one book of short stories. And Penguin immediately assigned the book, and the rest is history. I think after that, again, S.D. Burman chose me because somebody who read Guru Dutt said, we are all S.D. Burman fans. And I said, well, I am his fan too, and I'm a fan of Hindi music. So they said, would you like to do a book? We have some collection of news reports from over many years. We can give it to you. And that's how that happened. And Jagjit happened because I was assigned the book. And I quickly said yes, because I love the man's music. I love his voice. And again, it was connected to music. And of course, Hariji happened because everybody loves Hariji. And I was at his house listening to something that he had organized with Birju Maharaj, and I looked at him and I said, look at this man who's, 80 plus, so well traveled, so amazingly talented, so well loved. How humble he is. What kind of a life has he had? And that's how that biography came.
And it shows, the way the book is, I personally feel that it reads like music itself. It's like so beautifully knit together, capturing an entire life and journey of that life in a few pages at times can be it's quite a challenge. What are the key things to keep in mind when you are writing about someone else's life? And someone who's in public eye all the time, who is known and has millions and millions of fans, what are the few important things to keep in mind?
I think listening, of course, is the most important. As a journalist, one learns to listen, so that helped me a lot. Noting down carefully is again important, because even at this stage in my life, I do make mistakes in names and dates. I get confused with spellings, so I have to make sure I ask and I note down. But I think the most important fact to remember is that, when a person is alive, there are fans, there are people who will know more about his life than I do and come forward and say, but you left out this fact. So I have to sift through the very well-known facts find the lesser known facts and not and keep that balance between the known and the lesser known or the unknown to keep the story alive and to make the man come alive. That is finally what matters. That when you read a biography, you should feel you've met the person, you know the person, you have been listening to him. And that is one more thing I want to say, that I keep myself out of every biography. You will never see me saying I felt.
And that's the exact question I was about to ask you. How do you manage to do that? Because it is very tough. I know that quite a few of the times, and given the kind of career you've had, you would know people who know them or them themselves. You would be knowing them pretty well and well enough to have a personal equation with them. How do you, how do you keep that influence away from your work?
I think most of the people I wrote about, except Hariji, had already passed on. So there was no question, except Abrar Sahab, of course, I was interviewing him, and it was his story. So where do I come in? I did put in interspersing because he tended to kind of meander and jump years and get confused. So I would do joining the dots, but it was just factual. Because I knew if I entered the picture, the reader would say, is this Abrar's story? Is this Sathya's story? What the hell is she doing here? This is Guru Dutt's story with Abrar and Abrar's story with Guru Dutt. So I consciously kept myself out, and I didn't realize that I was doing this. I just realized that I had to tell the story as it was. But it was a lot of reviewers who pointed out that Sathya has not entered the picture, which is a good thing.
And which happens with most of your books. I feel that's...
Yeah, in none of my books, except in the preface or the foreword, will you hear me saying the word I. And I think that's important whether you're writing or reviewing.
For the people who've passed on and you've written on and about, does it always be at the back of your mind that there might be things about them that you write which may not be factually correct? How do you ensure that that kind of research is thorough enough for you to be confident to take that bit from that person's life and quote?
Well, I think when my research is usually interview based, I don't go into the internet except for a filmology or a musicology or a fact about which movie or which song came before the other. So only for facts I go there. All books are interview based, and in S.D. Burman's case I had a lot of interviews which I put in. In Jagjit Singh's case again, I had Chitraji telling me the stories, and she vetted the copy afterwards, and she changed two things in it. One was a word I had used when I was talking about her daughter. She said the word is a little painful for me, can you make it milder? I did that, and one was a factual error I had made about the date. So, though of course I did speak to his accompanists, I spoke to some of his composers, his arrangers, I spoke to Daman Sood, who does his music recording. So, but it was all, I spoke to Gulzar Saab, they were all factually based. And my biographies are about work. They are not about the man's personal life, except where it affects the work. So there is nothing that is based on conjecture or hearsay. I don't want to hurt anybody. I want to chronicle a work that 20 years, 100 years from now, hopefully if the book is still around, people read and say, oh, so here was this great man and this is how he operated. This is how his creative genius flowered.
But tell me, Sathya, whenever, and since you yourself mentioned that it's most of these books have come out of your interviews with people who are from the family, or you must be collecting huge amount of data while you're interviewing them over several days, I'm sure. How do you finally sit down and decide what to pick and what to leave out from that volume of data that you've collected, even if it's only on his or her work?
I think I'm also careful. I edit before I start doing the interviews and ask questions that I know will pertain to what I want to take forward. So if I'm talking on Jagjit Singh, for example, I talk about his early years, I talk about his struggle, I talk about his first breaks, and then how he made some of his path-breaking collections of music and what happened in his personal life. And that is a book where the personal comes in very strongly because his life changed after his son's death. Chitra's life changed after his son's death. So there are 3 chapters on that aspect, and then again I continue on how he changed as a human being, how he changed in his heart and his approach to music. So there is a certain unknown, unconscious editing of the questions I ask or the places I want to go to in my interviews. I think that helps. So there is nothing that I don't want already on paper. If there is, I can leave it out.
Coming to your most recent book on Pandit Chaurasia, he has, in fact, the book shares a lot of episodes from his life, from his past, from his childhood. How did you get him talking? How did you manage to get him talk about these things and share his memories with you?
See, in Hariji's case, I was lucky. There was already a book called Good Winds of Change. There are in fact 4 books about him, which is why we had to look at an unusual way of presenting his life. I couldn't go, he was born, he lived, he did this, he did that, he grew up, So that helped me. There was a lot of background there where he had, being much younger and his mind was much fresher then, he spoke about details which I left out. He speaks about his mother's death in the book and how he went looking for her. He didn't know she had died and he went looking for her and found her funeral fire, Now that I thought had nothing to do with his creative genius. So I left that out, though it's a very poignant story. So I did pick up from there and then I used that as the basis of my interviews. And I got fresh material because he had fresh memories that came to the fore. As we grow older and older, new older memories come to the fore. And he could think up some more things for me to tell me, and especially in cinema, he came up with amazing stories. His wife, Anuradha ji, was a huge help because her memory is like as sharp as a pin. So she could tell me a lot about dates. He gets confused with dates. I get confused with dates. So she was my rock. Like I would go to her and say, "ये कब हुआ? ये पहले हुआ कि बाद में हुआ?" And she would say, "नहीं, ये पहले हुआ, ये बाद में हुआ. You got it wrong." And there were times when Hariji would tell me something, then he would say, "नहीं हुआ, ऐसा नहीं हुआ, वैसे हुआ." So I would go to her again and say, "Tell me which is right." And she'd say, "No, he never stayed there. He did stay with his sister." Things like that. So I think that's how you decide what to keep and what is important.
Another challenge that as a reader or maybe someone who is just about beginning to write might face, and I would like to ask you about that, is how to, so you've collected all this material, you've put together and you're continuously parallelly editing it in your mind and putting a story together, and yet a lot of biographies, unlike a lot of biographies, it reads like a movie. It reads like, a story which is fiction, more often than not. I mean, how do you manage to keep that element of, interest alive? Because biographies, most of the people write it in a way which after a few pages, once you get into it and you read, you too tend to find places or spaces where you would like to take a break because they go very heavy, they kind of become slow, boring, but that's not the case with you. How do you manage to do that?
Thank you. That's a big compliment. But I think it comes from my ability to write fiction. it's something that I don't know, I can't explain it. Because most of my stories are very short when I write fiction, and they're to the point. They are very terse in the storytelling, and yet there's a lot of mood. So I think I just applied that, and it happened the first time with S.D. Burman, when my editor and I decided let's do it differently, because there were two books on S.D. Burman, a third was coming out. Penguin said, please go to someone else because we already have a book coming out on him, which is why I went to Harper's. But so we decided we'll do it differently, and I read this wonderful book called Coming Through Slaughter, which is about a trombone player, where Michael, I can't pronounce his name, but the person who wrote English Patient, he wrote this entire tiny little biography based on 3 news cuttings and 1 interview. And it was very stream of consciousness. It was very, you had to read it 2-3 times to understand it. It was a little tough, but it was very enjoyable. So that was my inspiration. But of course, I made sure that I didn't make it tough, because I want people to read. I want people to appreciate S.D. Burman's genius. And when I did Hariprasad, they again asked me, they said, we like your S.D. Burman book, The Family. So can you do something similar? So I said, yay, because I had done Jagjit Singh in a linear manner. So I was very delighted. I said, wonderful. And then I looked for the stories with mood. I looked for imagery when I was interviewing him. Like I would ask him, what was the river like? Was it swift flowing? Was it muddy and slow? So I would get those images. I would get the texture. And then it's very easy to create it, recreate it. So you have a film in words.
You yourself must be having a life, full of these experiences and episodes with people and situations and, whole lot of exciting stuff happening early on in your career, and thereafter, moving from that to writing books and still continuing to be in touch with what you yourself love, that is cinema, fashion, music, art, culture. When do we get to hear something? Tell us something about your early part of career, especially when you were editing Femina. How was that experience?
I think it was very, very exciting. Every day was a new day, because one never knew who you would meet, why you would meet. I would meet one day a woman selling nighties and maxis in the train when I used to travel by train. It would become, and that's where my book on Me to You came, which very few people know. I want to show it just in case somebody is looking for my editorials. This is my book From Me to You, where there are 80 of my editorials. Otherwise, I would be meeting Gayatri Devi one day. I would be meeting a designer another day. So it was fantastic. It would be a fashion show one day, something very down to earth another day. And then I was on something called the Women's Edition, where editors from 11 countries would meet to talk on reproductive health. So I traveled the world with that. And would come back and write very serious stories on incest, on domestic violence, on reproductive health, on infant mortality and how to prevent it. So I met amazing people like in Jamkhed, the sustainability project, where villages are creating paramedical workers who are dais who go and help women deliver in their homes. So it was an exciting life, and I think I have kept my finger in the pulse. I have shifted from doing regular things into doing travel, which I love doing. So I write travel stories now. I do the column, so that keeps me in touch with my Me to You mind, which looks for humanity in everyday life. So I think it's great.
And acting. This is what I got to know from your bio. I never knew that you were into acting. This is
Yeah, but it was very, very choreographed. What shall I say? Experimental acting. Uh, very tough. We used to sorry, rehearse for a year before we would start blocking the play, and it was an amazingly fulfilling experience. Yeah, I would go after work for rehearsals, reach home by 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and come to work the next day, and it was amazing. And we toured all over India with those plays. And what I do now, which is derived from that, is I promote all my books with stage shows. I've done Dutt as a stage show. I've done Jagjit Singh and S.D. Burman as solo stage shows where I talk about it and show clips. I show audiovisuals and tell stories from the book. So I think that it has helped open me up as a performer, as someone who enjoys facing an audience, and it promotes my books.
Of course, and that comes across. I mean, each one of your book is a gem. What else? What else is it that we don't know about you?
Oh, I love to trek. I started trekking. Yeah, I started trekking after I left Femina. I think I was 52 years old when I started trekking. And I've been trekking almost every year. I should have been on a trek in Himachal right now, in Spiti. But for the lockdown, I would have been there and you wouldn't have got me on this chat. So I love the mountains. I love singing, but to myself. I did learn a little music, but my master has stopped coming. So I'm a little sad about that. But I'm hoping to find another teacher.
Would you like to hum a few lines for us before we say goodbye?
I'm not sure, but I can try, and if it turns out terrible, you should promise to cut it out.
I will. I'll do that. I'll do that. No, but I have a feeling it'll be nice.
खो गए हम भरी दुनिया में तन्हा हो गए तुम न जाने किस जहां में खो गए. Look how nervous I am. I get very nervous when you ask me to sing. My voice goes cut, 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 cut.
No, it was... Oh wow, Sathya, I never ever would have come to know of this, had we not been chatting like this. Thank you so much for your time. I'm sure the viewers are going to love hearing and listening to what you shared with them today.
No, but you are a wonderful interviewer, so thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sathya. That was the amazing Sathya Saran for you. A writer, an editor, a trekker, a traveler, and an impactful storyteller. I had the honor of getting to know her better with the latest book, Breath of Gold. An absolute pleasure to work with. Her enthusiasm invigorates you. That's what comes from years of experience of managing teams and the huge creative influence every bit of your life has on you. Subscribe to the channel to take a sneak peek into another such life and the million stories that enrich the craft of storytelling. Until the next time, stay safe, stay smiling, and keep exploring new stories. Bye-bye.